Welcome all back to another video. Specs here, returning with my second review to date. I love comic books. I love reading them, I appreciate them, and at one point I even collected them. So it goes without saying I love comic book movies. And for today, the first of many comic book movie reviews will be bestowed upon the latest incarnation of one of the greatest comic book characters of all time, one of the greatest fictional characters of all time in any medium. Anyone that disagrees shall be sentenced to, 1,000 cycles in the Phantom Zone. I'm of course referring to the last son of Krypton, the Man of Steel himself, Superman, and we'll be discussing James Gunn's 2025 DCU release, Superman, originally titled Superman Legacy. My reviews are spoiler-filled, so for those of you who haven't seen this film so far and don't want to be spoiled, you've been warned. Let's get to it. At the start of the film, we're introduced to an already established Kal-El. He's been Superman now for 3 years and has gained quite a reputation. I understand the decision to not retell the origins for Superman. Everyone who has read comics, or at the very least has watched comic book movies or anything from the DC animated universe, knows how Superman came to be. The same can be said for Batman as well. But I think if you're creating a new universe with these characters, it's important to understand where they come from and what shaped them to be the individuals we know them as. Even if it's been done to death or you're just sick of seeing it, it's part of the journey that each and every character goes through. Nevertheless, this time around, Supes is caught in this international civil war conflict between Boravia and Jaranpur, which we find out later on is organized and orchestrated by Lex Luthor himself. We also start with Supes experiencing his first defeat at the hands of the Hammer of Boravia, aka Ultraman. For those of you unfamiliar, Ultraman is essentially an alternate evil clone of Superman. So I think in the future, if they wanted to, they could explore a potential crime syndicate spinoff with Ultraman. I mean, I think that'd be cool. I wouldn't mind seeing that, and I certainly wouldn't rule it out at this time. Anyway, Luthor, like the master puppeteer that he is, sets up this war where he, the Raptors, Ultraman, and a few others, or Planet Watch as they're referred to, would assist Boravia in conquering Jaranpur. In exchange, he would receive half of the country and essentially be a king or a warlord in his own domain. He spent years studying Supes, learning and observing any and every aspect of his abilities, his weaknesses, and so on. The man probably has server rooms with what one can assume is hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of data. This was all done with only one intention, technically two, to dismantle and discredit Superman. Now, we do live in a world now where any and everything is on the internet, social media, what have you. It can get to the point where if a celebrity or someone of influence catches a cold, it becomes viral or something to that effect. And naturally, they incorporated that heavily into this film, which I'm not fond of, but it does give the film a more groundish tone, so why not? The cast for the film, I believe, was very well rounded. Everyone, I believe, was perfectly selected and worked very well with whomever they shared scenes with. I also do appreciate how faithful they were to Lex in this iteration. Ultimately, this is his goal, to which he succeeded for like a minute. But that's the kind of resilience I enjoy to see from Luthor. Even if he's defeated, he still manages to sneak in a win. But that just makes for a resourceful, yet cerebral antagonist. I will say I do question how a man of his influence and intelligence would date someone who's attached to her phone like fish need water and is careless by nature. I mean, come on, later on in the film, we literally see her leaking this information to this iteration of Jimmy Olsen. I really don't know how he does it. I mean, does Lex not, figure this out, put two and two together? You'd think Lex wouldn't leave such openings or leave any cracks in the plumbing to which he was brought down to, but he'll come to terms with that later. This time around, he's portrayed by Nicholas Hoult, who knocked it out of the park with his performance. Hoult, of course, is no stranger to comic book films. We've seen him before as Beast in some of the X-Men films over at Marvel, and he was a beast, pun intended. So I'd expect nothing less, but I also expect big things to come from his Luthor down the road, which we'll see again, I'm sure. Rachel Brosnahan, who portrays this iteration of Lois Lane, was a complete ball of fire. I think this may be the best version of Lois we've seen. She was everything Lois needed to be, which in my book is feisty, attractive, annoyingly investigative, but simultaneously being witty and candid. I mean, you can't go wrong there. One thing I can say is Superman is not alone in his journey, for we see a wide array of other DC characters and mentions throughout the course of this 2-hour film. The main one being the Superdog himself, Krypto. Now, this may be an unpopular opinion, but I hate that they included Krypto in this film. He did not need to be in there, and I think they could have very well have told a version of this story without Krypto. To be clear, I don't hate dogs or anything of that nature, so if you're coming at me with that, shh. Crypto, I personally have never been a huge fan of. I don't think he's a horrible character per se, but he's never really captivated my attention as much as Soups, obviously. I understand that there's a huge fan base for him, and I also understand why it makes sense to include him in this modern rendition, as he really is a good plot point for the kindness and humanity Clark's known for. I also think low-key part of it was also everyone you see now has dogs, and Gunn himself is a dog lover from what I've seen, so I think that had a large hand in that decision. But with the exception of a scene or two, Crypto isn't really doing much to necessitate the amount of screen time he has, which segues into the negatives I have to say about the film. While I do appreciate the numerous appearances of other DC characters we see, I also think that was a mistake. The title of the film is Superman, not Superman and Friends, not Superman and the Justice Gang, not the Justice Gang, World's Finest, Superman. We're introduced to the DCU's take on the beginning of what inevitably will lead to Justice League. But why? I honestly dislike the notion of jam-packing a bunch of characters, while they're cool to see, into a story that frankly they have no business being involved in at this time. We've seen this before from Gunn in the Suicide Squad, which I thought was great, and over at Marvel with the Guardians of the Galaxy films, which I also thought was great. But the key component to these films is they're about teams, and not just one specific member over the other. So it makes sense. And say what you will about Man of Steel, but that's how a Superman film should be, in my eyes, in the sense of having it more streamlined and not trying to stuff characters and potential spin-offs down your throat, as if to say, they'll never be seen again, so let's load this bitch up with characters because we may never get a sequel.
And let me see, what else could we pile on?
However, it's awesome to see Hawkgirl. It's awesome to see Terrific, who was one of the better characters and portrayals in this verse thus far. It's also awesome to see Metamorpho, and it was hilarious to see Guy Gardner's Green Lantern, shitty bowl haircut and all, appearing kick-ass, but the story didn't need it. And much like I mentioned with Crypto, they could have told a version of this story where they didn't include these characters. That's my biggest gripe with the film, because the focus is then not on Superman, but on these characters, as brief as their roles are, some would argue. But it didn't work for me. Sometimes less is better. I would have been more forgiving if they were just referenced, or at the very least we only see them in post-credit scenes. That being said, at the end of the day, DC will do whatever DC wants to do. So
Fuck me, right?
with all the talk and discussion of all these other characters, I've saved the best for last, and that'd be David Cornsweet as the titular character. Going into the film, I really had no expectations whatsoever if he's gonna rock or tank as a character, but easily, this is one of the best portrayals of Superman I've seen. One thing that stuck out to me is while on one hand, he feels like an amalgamation of the Supermans that came before him, such as Kirk Allen, Christopher Reeve, Tom Welling, Tim Daly, and Henry Cavill, to name a few. On the other, it feels like a crisp new take that he brings his own flair, and I'm very fond of it. I definitely want to see more of him down the line, which I'm sure won't be an issue. And overall, his high degree of kindness and humanity is almost inspiring to watch. Perhaps, indeed, there was a moment or two in the theater where I just felt unworthy to be in his presence. All jokes aside, that's what made the performance super. And it doesn't stop with just Clark, but even his adoptive parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. Jimmy Olsen, Perry White. I mean, it's a very wholesome and cohesive dynamic that just shines on screen. It also goes to show you when you have great and good people in your life looking out for you, having your back, you're indomitable. So as far as I'm concerned, David Cornsweet's Superman was refreshing, familiar, but original. I definitely want to see more, and even now more than ever, I really would like to see the relationship or friendship between this Superman and the DCU's Batman, if or when that happens. All in all, James Gunn's Superman is a refreshing yet familiar take on the character, which I enjoyed thoroughly. While I do have my issues with the film, as mentioned,
Is it possible?
I still thought it was entertaining, insightful, and visually stunning. Remember, this is the guy who brought us Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad, so naturally, that charm would follow, and did, successfully, I might add. The suit itself, I thought was beautiful. It's very vibrant. I love the design of the logo, and they even made the red trunks work. So for me, the suit is nothing more than eye candy. We can also probably expect the same with Batman, but that remains to be seen at this time. This chapter will be titled Gods and Monsters because the DCU will be in chapters, which I like. I like that idea. We know it will bring Supergirl, who had a cameo towards the end of the film. We also have a Clayface film on the way, which still astounds me that that's even happening, but in a good way. There's also Swamp Thing, and probably one of the more anticipated films for me personally, The Brave and the Bold, which will introduce us to the DCU's Batman and the Bat family. Honestly, with a chapter titled Gods and Monsters, how is there not a Solomon Grundy film in the works? Can someone please in the comments explain that to me, because I'm not seeing that. DC DC, if you're listening, make a Solomon Grundy film. You know how badass and sick that would be? Make it happen if you're listening. DC, though, overall, over the last few years, have kind of been through a muddled hurdle when it comes to their direction, if you will. But if they continue to give us content like Peacemaker or Superman, the future is looking bright, and I want to be there to see it. And that, my fellow viewers, is a wrap. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If not, I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments below anyway. If you enjoyed and want to see more, do yourself a favor, be buddies with that subscribe button, and it'll fucking work wonders. That being said, it's time for all of you to scat, and Specs will be seeing you again real soon.